it comes to concrete, we've got you covered. RowPaint.com offers custom concrete coating services for your garage, business, warehouse, and more. And we do it in one day. We are your complete concrete coatings solution.
Well, good afternoon, folks. BJ Rains here with the Idaho Press, joined by Bob Behler, voice of the Broncos. If you're watching us live here on social media or on delay on social media, this is also a Bronco Report podcast that will be going up the audio later. So thanks to Ridley's Family Markets, RowPaint.com, but most importantly, thank you to Bob Behler as we are here to preview something we didn't get to talk about having last year. Spring game, the Boise State spring game at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. You guys will have the call of that on the radio. So I guess let us know how folks can to get the audio of that tomorrow, since there will be no TV broadcast. This is all they will get, but also just how excited are you to be in the press box tomorrow calling a football game, so to speak?
Well, first of all, can you hear me, BJ?
You're good.
Okay, good, because I couldn't hear myself. So one of those technical things when you get on the air, sometimes when you can't hear yourself, you're wondering if you're coming through. You can hear it on the radio locally on 670 KBOI or 93.1 The Ticket. You can also hear us on all of the various stations throughout the state of Idaho that are part of the network. And then you can hear us online as well by going to Boise State's website. They'll have a link there as well for people to listen to. So, again, you'll have to trust Pete and my descriptions because there's no video of this game. And I'm very excited. Last year, of course, we didn't have a spring practice season. I think they had 2 or 3 practices before the whole thing got shut down, and then sort of an abrupt start coming up in September that led to the start of the season in October. So hopefully things are a little more normal. When I've been watching these baseball games that they've had lately, where there's maybe, 10, 15% of the stadium is full. I don't know if they've been cranking the crowd noise, but it sure seems noticeable that there's 6,000 or 7,000 people in there at these stadiums, and I'm sure it will be tomorrow as well.
Yeah, and I think, Bob, we both obviously, did the football games last year, and there were those 2 games where they had 900 fans or whatever it was, BYU and Colorado State. But the road games, I think of the Mountain West Championship game, how eerie that was to have no fans in the stands for a championship game. And I think at basketball, they had some fans in there at the end of the season, but for the most part, it was empty for basketball. And I think I don't know why, but to me, it was more weird to have an empty football stadium than an empty basketball stadium, for me at least. And it was just a weird, eerie feeling for a lot of last year. And so just to have, 6,000, maybe could be up to 6,300 fans in the stands, I think is going to be really exciting. And hopefully, in my mind, a start to getting maybe, over half or maybe full capacity for football in the fall. So I'm just really excited for, we've been lucky enough to still be going to these games, but for fans to get a chance to get in there and And I'm sure for you, it's more fun to call a game when there's a crowd going crazy on a play. And for me to watch a game and write about it, it is more fun with fans, right?
It does, and it adds a lot if you're certainly listening on the radio to hear something in the background. I mean, if C.T. Thomas makes a great catch in the end zone for a touchdown, or Brock Miller gets a sack for the defense, there's going to be some noise, which I think adds to the excitement of the game. And certainly when you're listening on radio, it comes through your speakers so that it makes you feel like you're there. I think people are going to enjoy it. I think the guys are going to enjoy it. And it's, even though they're kind of limiting the crowd to 6,000, a lot of times the spring games don't get more than, say, 10,000 anyway. So I think this is going to feel like a pretty normal spring game. Now, with the new coaching staff, a quarterback competition, and coming off a year where, the fans haven't been able to go, I think they probably could have gotten more than 10 for this year because there were so many things that, sort of the ingredients coming forward that would make you think that there should be a good crowd for this one. And, hopefully the weather will be, cooperating. I think it's supposed to be sunny, but a little bit windy.
Yeah, and I will say this, though, Bob, like watching some of these baseball games where there's only 15,000 people there, but they're spread out equally amongst the stadium. You don't have the sections in the upper deck where they're completely empty like you might for some games. So the fact there's only going to be 6,000 people there, but they're going to be spread evenly throughout the entire stadium, that does give you little bit, different atmosphere than maybe, 5,000 people just, packed in the bottom level, and then there's nobody up top at all for a game like this. So I think that'll be interesting. Let's take a quick look for folks. Bob, this is the schedule for folks for the spring game. This graphic is provided by Boise State. I took it off their Twitter account. They posted it this morning. 1 o'clock, the parking lot's open, but we should mention, Bob, no tailgating is allowed for this. There you see that 2:30, the gates will open. The team will come out and do a warm-up about 3:20, and then they're expecting the game to start around 4 o'clock. So no tailgating, Bob, but they're still going to do their normal warm-up, and it still should have the little bit of a feel of a game day atmosphere.
Absolutely. And I think that, people kind of are going to enjoy coming in, kind of seeing the team, seeing the, some of the new players, some of the old players coming in there. The offense is going to be wearing orange. The defense is going to be wearing blue. And then we, of course, have the quarterbacks in white, which means don't touch them.
That is right. Definitely in a game like this. We do have an interesting scoring format also. It's not going to be a straight scrimmage, Bob, because they don't have the numbers yet with the outgoing seniors and not having guys in here yet. So it's going to kind of be a modified offense versus defense format.
Yeah, and I think one of the things when they talk about numbers, I think the biggest position that teams are concerned with is defensive line and offensive line. But I think it's really defensive line, because when you roll on a particular drive, you don't substitute people in the offensive line. But at defensive line, you like to keep people fresh. And if you try to divide up between, one side and the other, and I do think there are some defensive linemen like Dimitri Washington. I'm not sure if Keegan Freeborn's been out there this spring or Herbert Gums. So I think the defensive line position is a little bit depleted, in the fact that, you wouldn't be able to rotate if you decided to divide the defensive linemen up into two separate teams.
Well, we'll talk more about the defensive line in a second as one of our positions to watch here. But quickly, for folks that aren't aware, the offense, it's pretty standard. 6 points for a touchdown, 3 points for a field goal. You get 1 point for the PAT. And then for an explosive play, which they designate as a 12-plus yard run or a 16-plus yard pass, you get an extra point for that. Defensively, you'll get 6 points for if you score yourself on defense. 3 points the defense gets for a turnover or a fourth down stop. 2 points for a 3-and-out. Sack also gets them 2 points. And then I thought this was a little interesting. Inside the red zone, if the defense holds the offense to a field goal attempt, 4 points. So even if the field goal goes in, the offense only gets 3. So holding them to a stop actually is a win for the defense down by the goal line.
I wonder if it'll also encourage the offense to go for it inside the red zone as well. Although, if you go for it as opposed to punt, you could afford to give the defense 3 points if you don't make it. So I think there'll be some strategy, especially as we get into the second half of the games. Couple of things, too. They're going to do something different with where they're going to start the drives, BJ. And if the defense gets the offense backed up and the punt is short and they say fair catch it, they're going to move the ball back into the other end of the field, because it isn't fair if the defense bottles them up, forces a punt, and then lets the offense start at the 35-yard line. So they're basically going to move things back to the other end of the field, and I think that's maybe showing you that a defensive coach is running the show here, because there are a couple rules that look like they benefit the defense a little more than they benefit the offense. The other thing that I'm most excited about is it looks to me like we're going to see a lot of ones against ones and twos against twos, which to me makes for a better scrimmage. I've been to a couple of scrimmages at other schools where they've had the ones, if you can believe it, go against the twos and put scores on the board, and it's like 45-7. That to me is a waste of a spring game, or let's make it a little more competitive. And I think that doing that, I think it's going to make it a little better tomorrow.
Well, I can remember Boise State spring games where the number 1 offense would go against the number 2 defense, and then the number 2 defense would go against the number 1 offense, which is how they do it a lot of times in practice, but that doesn't really show you a whole lot or show fans a whole lot. Also, you mentioned joking about Andy Avalos, a defensive-minded coach. Well, for just to mix things up also with the protocols this year, they're spreading out, and so one of the sides is going to go use the old varsity room locker room. And, of course, he sends the offense down to the varsity locker room. He tried to tell us the other day, Bob, that he sees that as a reward, the nostalgia of going back in the old locker room. But the defense is going to get their nice comfy digs, and the offense will have their own locker room and come out at the other end. I can't remember in my time here, Bob, them using 2 separate locker rooms and trying to split up the teams like this.
Well, I do think some of it is COVID related, where they want to space the people out. I do think that's the case. Before I got here, I announced games at UMass, BJ, and we went from the first half of the time I was there with a coach that was offense all the way to a coach that was defense all the way. And I asked one of the kids on the defensive side of the ball, what's the biggest difference? And his answer was, the defensive bus gets to go first when we're traveling down the road. So I don't know if that'll be the case also, because I think didn't Harsin always ride on the offensive bus? So maybe the defensive bus will get to go first here.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. What in terms of this game, Bob, or you call it a game, but it's basically a modified scrimmage, and what are you as the voice of the Broncos, but also just as a fan or as someone that hasn't seen a lot of spring, practice in the new Andy Avalos era, what are you looking forward to seeing? For me, it's the new offense. Tim Plow, we hear so much about just how fast are they going to go, and they're not substituting, and it just sounds like it's going to be this innovative new kind of up-tempo, high-octane offense, and we're hearing about the RPOs and the run-pass option and different reads and decisions the quarterback's going to have on every play. Now, I get it. It's the spring game. They're still learning the offense. They're also not going to put a ton out there, so it's going to be pretty base stuff. But I think we're going to get an idea as to how different this offense really is going to be from Brian Harsin's offense. And so for me personally, that's the number one thing I'm looking forward to is Tim Plow's offense. What does it look like? Where would you go?
I am looking forward to that as well, but I want to caution people. This is still a practice. And, the ones are the ones for a reason, and the twos are a two for a reason. And if we get further down the line than that, so you have to kind of give players some slack, because usually speaking, when you try to go fast, the better players are the better players and they pick it up quicker. So, I'm not saying this thing's not going to look fast and it's not going to look like, what it's maybe going to have an idea of looking like in September. But, you're right. It is a practice. They've been working on it for a couple of months tops. And, they might not want to show anything. If the quarterbacks are wearing white and they're not live, if it's an RPO, it's going to be like two-hand tap and they're going to be stopped. So I'm not really sure, what you can gain with an RPO if the quarterbacks aren't live.
Yeah. We've heard so much about and I even asked, CT Thomas today, are we talking like the old Oregon days where they'd sprint to the line, or what are we talking about in terms of the tempo? Now, remember, there was a couple of years where they obviously went no huddle for a long time. Then Harsin switched it up a couple of years ago. I don't remember the exact year, and they started huddling a lot more. And they kind of did some of both where they could do. So it's not like, first, I think Boise State fans would consider themselves more of a no huddle spread type offense anyway. So we're kind of getting back in a way to what Boise State has done here before. But I think some of the other stuff with the reads the quarterback can make and the other route concepts and things like that, I think are going to be unique to see what we're talking about here.
I also do like the idea that they've mentioned that, when you go fast, you basically have maybe matchups that you want. Because what's on the field for you, and if the defense doesn't have time to substitute, now what's on the field for them. So I think that's going to be something as the game goes along. I would assume that if you're running this no huddle and running this fast pace thing, if you're up 14 points in the fourth quarter, you're not going to run quick plays. You're going to take the time off the clock because you're ahead. So I would think that this isn't going to be, they're not going to run warp speed 100% of the time, I wouldn't think.
Well, folks, Bob, for the 6,000 or between 5, I guess the maximum would be 6,300 if they fill all the suites and things like that. 5 to 6,000 people that are going to be inside. What is a position or two that they should be looking at, that you're going to be looking at when you think of maybe an offense and defense and where people's eyes in a spring game should look? Everybody wants to just watch the ball and the play, and that's fine. But there are some key position battles, some key positions that we've heard a lot about this spring. Well, what are some areas that you'll be paying attention to?
Well, on the offensive side, first of all, it's going to start with the quarterbacks. And I want to see, how well these quarterbacks look like they have command of the offense. And I'm also going to be interested to see, are they giving both guys a chance to run with the ones? Are they putting both guys also with the twos? I think sometimes where somebody plays is a bit of a glimpse or a chance to peek at, maybe where they might think Bachmeier and Sears are. I would assume just for myself, if I was running this thing, I think I'd want to see both of them run with the ones, and I'd want to see what both of them do with the twos. The other position group on the offensive side that I'm looking forward to watching is the wide receivers. Shakir's not going to play wide receiver. He sounds like he's, ahead of schedule coming back. He's probably going to fair catch some punts based on what they told us. But last year, if you look at the numbers, Shakir was outstanding. C.T. Thomas, I thought, had a pretty good season. But then as far as wide receivers go, number 3 didn't contribute at all. And I think for this team's offense to be good, 3, 4, and 5 have got to contribute and come up with catches and give Bachmeier or Sears, whoever's quarterbacking, a viable 3rd and 4th choice out there. We didn't see that last year. And then as we go to the defensive side, the only position on defense that really has any amount of players lost is corners, with Walker and Williams both not returning. I think I kind of want to see what I think that they've got at corner, and also keep in mind that Markel Reed is injured. So one of the guys that I would have suspected would have been a starting corner isn't out there either. So we're looking at, a lot of younger guys out there. Tyreek LaBeouf is probably the only guy that really has had any kind of playing experience at corner.
And Caleb Biggers, the transfer from Bowling Green, won't arrive till the summer, and he's a guy that you would have you'd think a strong chance to compete for one of those 2 spots as well. So neither starting cornerback is probably going to be out there. So that is an thing to look at. You mentioned wide receivers. Steph Cobbs, number 82, is a guy we continue to hear about. Billy Bowens, we've heard some about. We heard Shea Whiting's name pop up today from C.T. Thomas. Dirk Cutter's son, Davis Cutter, number 17. Curious to see what he does out there. So there is a lot, and don't forget about Octavius Evans, number 1. I mean, he's a guy that last year it was kind of the mysterious case of Octavius, but he decided to come back, and I think they are still counting on him if he can stay healthy and live back up to his potential. For me, though, Bob, I want to see the running backs, because one guy first of all, in terms that we haven't seen at all, is Taquan Tyler, and he's a JUCO that's out there now, and they're expecting some things from him. But I also want to see, we've heard a lot about how the running backs are going to be used in this offense and get a lot of swing passes out of the backfield and be used a lot as route runners. We were at practice the other day, and they did a whole kind of it was really, I don't know how to describe it, but I haven't seen it any Boise State practice before, where basically they were having the different quarterbacks throw different routes to the different receivers, kind of stations where they were working on out of the backfield, short slants, stop and goes, hitches. And it was like all these different route concepts that are going to be used in this offense. Each player kind of went from station to station doing one of those, and I thought it was very interesting. And for me, how the running backs are used, because we've heard a lot about how the running backs are going to catch a lot of passes. And again, it's base, like you said, it's base stuff, and you're not going to put all your best swing passes out there to see somehow. But I still think you get a little bit of an idea how the running backs are going to be used. So I'm looking forward to that. And then on the defensive side, the defensive line, we continue to hear so much about the defensive line and Scott Matlock and Scaly Gahan. If I had $5 for every time we've heard their name, I wouldn't have to do this show right here. So, I mean, it's been pretty amazing to hear what we've heard from the defensive line. Now, again, you're not going to be sacking the quarterbacks in this game. The physicality won't be exactly the same as a regular season game, but we talk, you think about Shane Irwin and Keegan Freeborn and Divine Obasheri and all the guys I'm forgetting, but Jackson Cravens. Last year, they had to cancel a game because they didn't have enough defensive linemen. This year, the defensive line, to me, it sounds like is going to be a huge strength.
Well, especially if some of these guys come back. I mean, you lost Dimitri Washington in the second game. I think it was in the first half. Yeah. So, I mean, BJ, football is a simple game. If my defensive line is in your offensive line's face and getting in the backfield and not letting your running backs have a crease to run through, your offense is going to be in for a long day. And conversely, if your offensive line is giving a little bit of a crack so that your running backs can get through, you're going to have a much better day. So, I think that's why you don't see the upsets in basketball. Excuse me. You don't see the upsets in football that you see in basketball, because line play comes to play all the time. If my line is bigger and stronger and faster and tougher than yours, I'm going to win probably 10 out of 11 games that we play against each other. So I think that's maybe the biggest difference between what you see on the football field and the basketball field. If somebody's lines are far superior, they're not going to get beat.
Well, Bob, final thing here about football. We're 14 practices in. We've been talking to players and coaches here for about a month now. What are your impressions of the first couple of months of the Andy Avalos era and of what you've heard of this team, and what are your thoughts, I guess, as we, tomorrow afternoon put a bow on the spring?
Well, I think he's done a great job of, getting organized, getting people to buy in. The word vibe has been thrown around. I think that, whenever you have a new coach, a lot of times you'll see maybe some people leave or, a real big changeup. I don't think anything like that has happened. I think Coach Avalos has done a tremendous job of, keeping the brotherhood, is another word that they've been using, extremely strong, and people are, very excited to playing for him. And I also think he's picked himself a good staff. I mean, when you come in as a new head coach and you have not head coached before, or maybe not at the current time you're coming in, you can't just bring your whole staff with you. Like Coach Harsin took, a third or 40% of his staff here and took them to Auburn. If you're Coach Avalos, you can't just take a staff because you've got people who are, working for Oregon and over there working for Coach Cristobal. So you've got to start a coaching staff from scratch. And he ended up, bringing, some people in that he knew in the business from other teams. He kept some coaches, and I thought he came up with a tremendous staff, and I've been really impressed with what I have seen.
Yeah, so far we've seen a couple of practices, but in terms of the interviews and talking to the players, and from a media standpoint, it's been very nice. He's been pretty open. He's done a couple of his press conferences in person with us down there on the field or at the Blaymire. We've gotten to watch a couple practices, which we didn't get to do all of last season because of COVID. And so, he's been pretty good to work with from a media standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
That can always change. Obviously, he hasn't lost a game yet, but so far, it's been nice, and I'm looking forward to the game tomorrow. I hope fans are looking forward to the game tomorrow, and it should be fun. Final thing, Bob, I did want to ask one basketball question and get your take. We haven't had a chance to talk since the end of the season. We've since seen Donovan Ivory and Ray J. Dennis transfer. The season obviously ending with the loss to the eventual NIT champions, Memphis, in the second round of the NIT, the quarterfinals of the NIT. As they, we're still 4 days removed from the national championship game, so basketball season is officially over now for everybody, and we're turning the page towards spring workouts and next season. What was your final take on the season? What went wrong, and how you think that this offseason this team can do what they need to do, or what they need to do to really turn that corner next season?
Well, no, the NIT was only 2 games, but I was impressed with what Boise State was able to do in both games. Memphis, I thought, was clearly the best team in the field, and they were the only team that played Memphis to single digits. They lost that game by 5, and they did it without a top starter in Kejab and without a top sub in Rice. And they beat SMU under similar situations. They didn't have Kejab or Rice in the game. Now, in fairness, SMU was without a starter, basically at the same position that Kejab played, and they were without one of their top subs. So that was pretty much a wash between the two teams, but that was a tight game. And I thought Boise State showed me a lot in, after maybe the disappointment of not getting in the NCAA tournament. I thought to bounce back and have what I thought was a good showing in Texas at the NIT. I think part of the season was, the schedule was weird, and the fact that you played 2 games in 3 days against the same opponent. They played all of the easy teams first. They played all of the hard teams second. And I do think that probably made the feel of the season a little bit different. If you wouldn't have won 13 games in a row, but maybe you won 9 and lost 4 in that part of the season, and maybe if you had some of the easier teams in the back end, and maybe you lost a couple of those and say going 9-4 in the 13, maybe there would have been a different feel to the season, a different feel coming into the end, but lost a couple of tough games to San Diego. You win one of those, you might be in the NCAA tournament. And then, the one that still kind of scratches my head is the loss to Fresno. I think Nevada had a good matchup with them, and you played them 3 times and you got beat 3 times, but a point guard that handled the ball, gave them a lot of trouble. So overall, I think it was a good season. It was probably not the season they or the fans would have wanted, but let's see what we got next year. If everybody comes back healthy, you're basically running it back with a similar team to what you had, minus Derek Alston.
Yeah, and I think for me that my final lasting thought is as it turned out, they always say there's, you can never have too many good players. Well, I think they may have had too many guys that wanted their their time and their minutes and their playing time, and it just didn't quite fit once they got all 8 guys together the second half of the season. I know they were playing the tougher teams, and that was part of it, but the first half of the season, for whatever reason, either somebody was hurt or ineligible or out of the game for whatever reason, sick, and once they got everybody back down the stretch, it just seemed like Leon kind of struggled to get the minutes figured out and to have everybody, who plays well with who. It's never, the pieces never quite fit. So you take away Ray J. Dennis, who I think is going to contribute for he was a good player and can contribute for whatever team he goes to next. Same with Derek Alston. Any team would like to have Derek Alston, but I think the sum of all parts potentially could add up to be better next season. And so I think you have a solid starting 5 with Acott running the point guard spot now and Shaver at the 2. You've got Dutrieve out there on the wing at the 3, and then you've got Kejab and at the 4 probably, and then Armish in the middle at 5. I think those 5 players by themselves will compete with those 5 players in the league. And then you've got, Max Rice coming off the injury. He'll be another key guy off the bench. I know they really like what Milner brought. And I think some of the other young guys, Burke Smith and Pavle Kusimanovic is the guy they like as a guard. So I think they'll be active in the transfer portal. Somebody had asked about that, but I don't think, Bob, they're going to go for another guy that we'll expect to start because that was the problem. They had too many guys that wanted to start and play their minutes. And so I personally think they're going to maybe find a Lonnie Jackson type guy, just a good, solid player that can give you, 15 minutes off the bench maybe, but not some guy who's going to come in here and a former 4-star recruit wanting to go down a level because he wants to be the leading scorer. I don't think that's the kind of guy they're going to look for, but I think there's high hopes for next season. We saw the Charleston Classic bracket came out today. That'll be Boise State's preseason tournament. That's the first known thing that we know about for next year. I know they're going to try to reschedule some of the games, Santa Clara and some of the Tulsa, some of the COVID games that got canceled. But when you're in a preseason tournament with West Virginia and St. Bonaventure and Clemson, 3 teams that were in the top 25 and ranked in the NCAA tournament, you're going to get some quality early season games, and I'm sure they'll load up the schedule as well. So, yeah, I know it's a disappointing season for fans, but I think they're going to be back in the gym probably next week, already turning the page to the season, and we'll see if this can finally be the year that they get over the hump. But, Bob, appreciate your time. First things first is the spring game tomorrow. What is the final way, again, if anybody came in late, that they can make sure to tune in to hear this broadcast, the timing and all that?
Well, our coverage is going to begin on 670 KBOI and 93.1 The Ticket beginning at 2:30. Rick Worthington and Paul J. Schneider are going to lead things off for an hour, and then Pete Kavanagh and I will take over at 3:30, and then we'll take you through the game, through the post-game interviews with Coach Avalos and a couple of the players, and then about for an hour after the game, you can hear from Mike Prater and Johnny Mallory. They'll be on to wrap things up for our coverage. You can hear it online as well. So a lot of ways to catch Boise State spring game offense versus defense. And, when you have these point totals, touchdowns, turnovers, big plays where you're giving points, you kind of hope that you figured out a scoring formula that's going to lend it to being a close game in the fourth quarter.
Well, I look forward to hoping that you and Pete can, are good at keeping track of the score and adding all this stuff up. And I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, sometimes all of a sudden you look up at the scoreboard and somebody has 3 or 4 more points than you thought they did. And it's like, where did they get those points? Oh, yeah. There was that 12-yard run that they get a point for. And then what about that sack? I guess they called the Irwin play a sack. I didn't think they did. I thought they called it incomplete, whatever. So, yeah, it is a little sometimes tough to figure out. We'll do the best job we can.
And there will be something on the line. They wouldn't tell us what it was. I know one year, I think with Brett Rippon, the winning team got a steak dinner and the losing team had to eat hot dogs. So I don't know what's on the line this year, but we'll have to wait and see what they decide. But, Bob, thanks for your time. Always appreciate it. We'll be listening 3:45, right? You'll be doing your segment with Prater and Ball Game. That's every day at 3:45. The Bronco focus there on KTIK 93.1, 1350 AM The Ticket. So thanks for that, Bob. We appreciate it. Thanks for this. I know it went a little over the time I promised you, but we got talking and it was a good time. So thanks, and we'll be listening to the broadcast tomorrow. It should be a lot of fun.
Thanks, BJ.
All right, take care, guys. There he is, Bob Behler, BJ Rains, and keep it tuned to KTIK Radio, the Bronco Radio Network, and, of course, the Idaho Press for all the updates.